The morning sun rose slowly over Nsukka, spilling golden light on the red earth roads and rusted zinc roofs. Smoke curled lazily from small cooking fires, and the smell of burning firewood mixed with the sweetness of ripe mangoes hanging low from their branches. In the distance, the steady sound of a pestle striking yam echoed like a heartbeat. By the far edge of the village stood a small mud house under the shade of an old mango tree. Inside lived Nkechi, a widow whose eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. She had only one son, Chibuzo, tall, handsome, and the last living piece of her late husband. Her dream for him was simple, that he would finish school, find honest work, and live a life that would make his father proud. But lately, something was changing. Chibuzo no longer looked her in the eyes. He came home late, speaking less, smiling less, except when his phone buzzed with messages that made him smirk in ways she didn't understand. That morning, as Nkechi stirred boiling water for pap, Chibuzo stepped out of his room wearing a brand new pair of sneakers, bright and clean like something straight from a shop in town. She stopped stirring and stared. "Chibuzo, where did you get this shoe? I never see it before." "Mama, no worry yourself," he said with a small smile. "I get them from one of my friends." She frowned. She knew her son had no job and no money for such gifts. "My son, nothing in this life is free. You hear me so?" But Chibuzo only sipped his pap, his phone buzzing again in his pocket. Later that day, walking to the market with a basket on her head, Nkechi passed two women selling vegetables. Their voices were low, but the words carried. "You know Nkechi pikin dey follow those boys wey drive black-tinted car," one whispered. "I hear say no big men dem dey work for," the other replied. "But you know wetin that one mean, blood money no dey ever end well." Her heart pounded so hard she thought the women might hear it. She walked past them without turning, her steps heavy, her ears still ringing with their words. That night, Nkechi sat on her bed clutching her Bible. She wanted to confront her son, but fear held her back. If she pushed too hard, he might leave. If she kept quiet, she might lose him to something far worse. She remembered her husband's dying words, "Protect our boy, no matter the cost." And the weight of them pressed on her like a stone. The next evening, as she was sweeping the front yard, a black car with tinted glass pulled up in front of their compound. Chibuzo walked out, said nothing, and slid into the back seat. The car disappeared into the night, leaving behind the smell of petrol and dust. When he returned hours later, his shirt carried the scent of expensive perfume and his pockets were heavy with crisp notes of money. Nkechi pretended to be asleep as he tiptoed into his room, but she heard him on the phone, his voice low and careful. "Yes. I'm ready. Tomorrow night." Her chest tightened. Ready for what? Who was he talking to? She lay still, gripping the edge of her wrapper as tears gathered in her eyes. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a dog barked into the darkness. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice trembling, "don't let me bury my only son." That night, Nkechi could not sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Chibuzo's face, young, proud, and full of something she could not name. The words "tomorrow night" echoed in her head like the steady drip of water into a bucket. She prayed until her knees ached, whispering psalms into the darkness, but her heart refused to rest. By morning, the sun's heat was already crawling into the small house. She cooked beans and plantain, hoping the smell would draw Chibuzo to the table like it did when he was younger. He came out late, dressed in a clean shirt and jeans, his hair brushed neatly. He barely touched the food. "You no go eat," she asked quietly. "I no too hungry, Mama," he said, taking a sip of water. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the boy she raised. "Chibuzo, is there anything you want tell me? Anything wey dey worry you?" He smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. "Mama, I dey fine. You worry too much." And with that, he was gone, leaving the sound of his footsteps fading down the road. By afternoon, the heat had become heavy, pressing down on the village. Nkechi went to the market to buy dried fish and pepper. As she walked back, balancing her basket, she noticed the same black-tinted car parked by the palm wine joint near the junction. 3 men sat inside, their faces hidden by dark glasses, even in the shade. She felt their eyes on her as she passed, and a cold shiver ran through her body. When she reached home, she found an envelope on the doorstep. Inside were crisp and 1,000 notes, more money than she had seen in a year. Her hands shook as she counted it. No note. No name. Just money. She looked toward Chibuzo's closed door, her chest tightening. That evening, as the sun dipped and the crickets began to sing, she decided she could not wait any longer. She stood outside his room, listening. She heard voices inside, Chibuzo and a stranger. Tomorrow night, the stranger's voice said, deep and calm. Once we start, there's no turning back. I understand, Chibuzo replied. Her knees weakened. She pressed herself against the wall, fighting to breathe quietly. The stranger left without noticing her. Chibuzo stayed inside, humming to himself, as if preparing for something important. Later, when he finally stepped out for fresh air, she tried to speak, but her words tangled in her throat. The look in his eyes stopped her. It was not anger, not fear, but something harder, something that made her feel she was staring at a stranger wearing her son's face. That night, she lay awake again, staring at the flickering light of the kerosene lamp. Tomorrow night. That was when she would either save her son or lose him forever. Outside, the wind picked up, making the mango tree branches scratch against the zinc roof like restless fingers. Somewhere in the darkness, the black car's engine growled before fading away into the distance. The day of tomorrow night came too quickly. From morning till evening, Mama Nkechi moved through her chores like a ghost. She washed clothes, swept the compound, boiled yam, but her hands were slow, her mind far away. She watched Chibuzo out of the corner of her eye. He was restless, pacing, checking his phone every few minutes. By late afternoon, he dressed sharply, black trousers, a fitted shirt, polished shoes. The scent of cologne filled the room. He avoided her gaze, slipping his wallet into his pocket. You dey go somewhere? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Yes, Mama, he said quickly, I go come back. Her heart clenched at the finality in his tone. When the black-tinted car rolled into the compound, she stood in the doorway, arms folded. Chibuzo looked at her once, his eyes unreadable, then slid into the back seat. The car's engine roared, and it pulled away, dust rising in its wake. She stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed her wrapper, tied it tightly, and began walking. The car was long gone, but she knew the road it had taken, toward the old abandoned warehouse near the river, a place people in the village whispered about. She followed the dusty path through the bush, her slippers catching on roots, her breathing fast and shallow. By the time she reached the clearing, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and deep red. The warehouse loomed ahead, its tin roof dented, its walls covered in creeping vines. She crouched behind a cluster of tall grass, peering through. The car was there. 4 men stood outside it, their faces hard, their voices low. Chibuzo was among them, holding a small black bag. She could not hear every word, but she caught phrases, delivery, no mistakes, the man is waiting. Her hands trembled. She wanted to call out to him, to drag him away, but something in her gut told her to stay hidden. Then, the tallest man stepped forward, placing a hand on Chibuzo's shoulder. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, and said something that made Chibuzo nod. In that moment, she saw it, the shadow in her son's eyes, the same shadow she had seen once before, many years ago, on the night her husband died. A memory flashed before her, her husband's pale face, the blood on his shirt, the way he whispered with his last breath, there is a curse, protect the boy. Her stomach turned cold. The men moved toward the warehouse entrance, and Chibuzo followed. Mama Nkechi's breath caught in her throat. She could not see what was inside, but a dim light flickered in the darkness, and the sound of chanting began to rise. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Her mind screamed for her to run back to the village, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot. Then, the door slammed shut behind them. And she was alone in the clearing, with the wind rustling the tall grass and the fasting curve of the moon watching from above. The night air was thick and warm, but a chill crawled over Mama Nkechi's skin as she crouched in the clearing. The faint glow spilling from the warehouse door seemed to pulse in rhythm with the deep, slow chanting inside. Her ears strained to catch the words, but they were in a tongue she did not know, heavy, old, and dangerous. She knew she could not just stand there. Every part of her wanted to burst in, grab Chibuzo, and drag him away. But the memory of her husband's last night came back to her, the knock on their door, the voices of strange men, the look of terror in his eyes before he told her to hide. She had hidden that night, and when she came out, he was gone forever. Her hands shook. Not again. Not this time. She crept closer, each step careful on the dry earth, until she was near enough to hear fragments of speech. A man's voice, low, commanding, was telling them about binding loyalty and sealing the path. Another voice, younger, uncertain, answered, Chibuzo. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to beg him to run, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. Then she saw movement, a shadow passed by the open gap of the warehouse window. It was the tall man she had seen before, the one with the slow, dangerous smile. He was holding something, a small calabash, its side stained dark with what she feared was blood. The chanting grew louder. She could hear drums now, not loud like festival drums, but deep and steady, as if they were coming from the earth itself. Then came a sharp cry, and the sound of something breaking. Her whole body jumped. She edged toward the window and peered in. Her breath caught. There was a circle of men, all dressed in black. In the middle, a candle flickered on the ground beside a bowl of red liquid. Chibuzo stood barefoot, looking from face to face like a trapped animal. The tall man was speaking to him, offering him the calabash. Drink, the man said. Once you drink, you belong to us. Wealth, power, protection, all yours. Chibuzo hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the door. For a moment, Nkechi thought he might refuse, but then the tall man's smile widened, and two others stepped closer to her son, their hands resting on his shoulders. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. If he drank, it would be over. The curse her husband spoke of would wrap itself around him, just as it had destroyed the man she loved. She looked around desperately. She had no weapon, no plan, just herself. And then, from somewhere in the trees behind her, a twig snapped. She turned sharply, and froze. A man was standing there, half hidden by the shadows, watching her. His face was unreadable, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't speak. But slowly, deliberately, he raised a finger to his lips. The man's finger stayed pressed to his lips, his eyes boring into hers like he could see straight into her fear. Nkechi's breath came in quick bursts. She didn't know him, yet something about his face pulled at her memory, like a name she once knew but had forgotten. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his feet silent on the dry grass. You shouldn't be here, he said in a low voice. If they see you, you won't leave alive. Her eyes darted toward the warehouse. My son is inside, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't leave him. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, he just stared at her, then glanced toward the warehouse, where the chanting had grown louder, the drum beats faster. If you try to stop them now, they will kill you before you even reach him, he said. But there is another way. She swallowed hard, torn between fear and desperation. What way? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small carved pendant, dark and smooth, strung on a thin leather cord. Your husband once wore this, he said quietly. Before, the night he died. The sight of it hit her like a blow. Memories came rushing back, her husband holding the pendant in his hand, telling her to keep it safe if anything ever happened to him. But she had never seen it again after his death. How do you have this? She asked, her voice barely a breath. I was there, the man said. I saw what happened. I know about the curse. His gaze locked on hers. And I know how to break it. But you have to trust me, and you have to move now. A sharp cry rang out from inside the warehouse, making her flinch. She could hear Chibuzo's voice, loud and panicked now. Wait. I'm not ready. The man grabbed her arm. If he drinks, it's over. Once the blood binds him, he's theirs for life. Her mind spun. She didn't know who this man was, whether he was a friend or an enemy, but she knew one thing: the moment she had been fearing all her life had arrived. The chanting inside shifted, becoming frantic, almost fevered. She heard the tall man's voice rise above the rest. "Drink, boy. Seal your fate." Mom Nkechi's pulse hammered in her ears. She had seconds to decide: run in and risk both their lives, or trust this stranger with the only child she had left. The man pressed the pendant into her hand. "Choose," he said. And from inside the warehouse came the sound of liquid being poured. The warm weight of the pendant in her palm seemed to burn into her skin. Mom Nkechi's chest heaved as she clutched it, her mind torn in two. Inside the warehouse, the chanting reached a frenzy, the drums like the beating of a giant's heart. "I don't know you," she whispered to the stranger, her voice shaking. "You don't need to," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "You just need to decide whether you want your son alive or lost forever." Another sharp cry echoed from inside, "Chibuzo again." She could hear fear in his voice now, real fear, the kind a mother could never mistake. Something inside her snapped. "I'm going in," she said, her voice low but steady. The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop her. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the far end of the warehouse. "Not through the door. There's a back way, less guarded." They moved quickly, keeping low as they circled the building. Mom Nkechi's bare feet were silent on the dirt, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure they'd hear it inside. The stranger led her to a narrow gap in the wall where some of the old planks had rotted. Through the gap, she saw the scene clearly for the first time. The tall man stood in the center, holding the calabash high, red liquid shimmering in the candlelight. Around him, the other men chanted, their shadows jumping on the walls. Chibuzo stood barefoot in the middle of a chalk-drawn circle, his face pale, his hands clenched. "Drink, and never know poverty again," the tall man said, his voice like a knife sliding across glass. Chibuzo's lips parted. His hand began to rise toward the calabash. Something inside Mom Nkechi roared awake. She pushed past the stranger, squeezing through the gap before he could stop her. Her wrapper caught on a splinter, tearing, but she didn't care. She stumbled into the circle of flickering light, her voice ringing out before she even knew what she was saying. "Chibuzo. Drop it. Don't touch that thing." The chanting stopped instantly. Every head turned toward her. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. The tall man's eyes narrowed, his smile gone. "Who let her in here?" Two men moved toward her, but she stepped forward, clutching the pendant in her fist. "If you want my son, you will have to take me first." For a moment, there was silence, then a low laugh from the tall man. "Oh, so you know the bloodline. You know the curse." Her breath caught, but she didn't let her fear show. "I know enough to fight it." The tall man tilted his head, studying her like she was an insect pinned to a board. "Then you also know, your husband made the same promise. And look how he ended." At the mention of her husband, something cold slid through her bones. She tightened her grip on the pendant. And then, before she could react, two men seized her arms from behind. "Bring her," the tall man ordered. "She will drink first. Then the boy." The grip on her arms was like iron, the men dragging her forward toward the center of the circle. The candlelight made the chalk lines on the floor seem to glow, and the air inside the warehouse felt thick, almost alive. Chibuzo's eyes were wide now, his voice trembling. "Mama, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer. She couldn't risk showing fear. If she did, it would break him. The tall man stepped closer, the calabash steady in his hands. "It's better this way," he said. "Blood of the mother will seal the son's loyalty. A gift, from one generation to the next." Mom Nkechi's stomach turned. She knew then that this was no simple cult. This was the curse her husband had warned her about, the thing that had haunted their family for years, feeding on them one by one. One of the men holding her shoved her to her knees. The tall man crouched, holding the calabash to her lips. The smell that rose from it was heavy and metallic, laced with something sweet that made her head swim. She turned her face away. I will never drink it. The tall man's smile was cold. You will. Or your son will watch you die tonight. Her heart pounded. She glanced at Chibuzo, who stood frozen, his fist trembling at his sides. Then, from the shadows near the back of the room, the stranger appeared, the same man who had given her the pendant. No one seemed to notice him slip in, moving along the edge of the circle. His eyes found hers for a brief moment, and he nodded once. She understood. Her fingers tightened around the pendant, hidden in her fist. She remembered her husband telling her, if you are ever in danger, press the center, and speak my name. She had never understood what he meant. Until now. The tall man's patience snapped. He grabbed her jaw and forced the calabash against her mouth. She felt the cold liquid touch her lips. With all her strength, she pressed the pendant center, the carved surface warm under her tongue. A sharp pulse shot through her hand. The candles flickered wildly. The chalk lines on the floor seemed to shift, breaking in places. The tall man stumbled back, his eyes widening. What is that? The stranger moved quickly, pulling a small knife from his belt. He cut through the rope binding Chibuzo's wrist, then pushed him toward her. Go. But before they could run, the tall man roared, the sound inhuman, and the other men closed in. The chanting began again, louder, faster, as if the whole building was breathing. The stranger stepped between them and the circle, his knife raised. Get them out of here, he shouted to someone unseen. Then the door at the back of the warehouse burst open, and a rush of cold air swept inside, snuffing out half the candles. The sudden gust of cold air sent shivers racing down Nkechi's spine. The half-darkness made the warehouse feel like it had sunk deeper into night. The men in black staggered, shielding their eyes as the candles flickered violently. The stranger didn't waste the moment. Move, he barked, shoving Nkechi toward the open back door. She grabbed Chibuzo's arm and pulled, her legs trembling but running all the same. Behind them, the tall man's voice thundered through the warehouse. You can run, but the curse runs faster. His laugh was deep, echoing in a way that didn't sound entirely human. They burst into the open air behind the building, stumbling over roots and broken wood. The night smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. Chibuzo's breath came fast. Mama, who is that man? What is happening? She didn't answer, not yet. The stranger was right behind them, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the tall man to appear at any moment. We can't go back to your house, he said. They'll find you before morning. Then where? Nkechi asked, still gripping Chibuzo's wrist. There's a place, the stranger replied, his voice low. Your husband knew it. A shrine in the hills, the only ground the curse cannot touch. They moved quickly, the sounds of the night around them louder than usual, the rustle of leaves, the crack of twigs underfoot, the distant cry of some animal. Every sound felt too close, too sharp, like the darkness was listening. After a while, Chibuzo pulled free, stopping in the middle of the narrow path. Mama, he said, his voice shaking. Tell me the truth. Why do they want me? She turned to face him, her chest still rising and falling from the run. Because you are my son, she said softly. And because of your father. Before she could say more, a sudden shape moved in the trees to their right. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, followed by another, and another. The same men in black, their faces hidden, now blocking the path ahead and behind. The stranger stepped forward, knife in hand. Stay behind me, he said. The tall man's voice came again, this time from the shadows themselves. You should have let him drink, woman. Now, you'll watch him be taken another way. The air grew cold, the wind picking up until it howled through the trees. In the distance, thunder rumbled, though the stars still shone overhead. Nkechi tightened her hold on the pendant. It was warm again, almost hot. Something deep inside her whispered that the real danger hadn't even begun. And then, from somewhere beyond the path, came a scream. Not from a man. Not from any animal she knew. Something older. Something hungry. The scream tore through the night like a knife through cloth, high and piercing, then dropping into a guttural growl that made the ground itself seem to tremble. Every man on the path froze. Even the ones in black shifted uneasily, their heads turning toward the sound. The tall man stepped forward from the shadows, his face lit faintly by moonlight. His smile had returned, but this time it was thinner, tighter. "It has come," he said, almost in a whisper. "The keeper of the blood." Mama Nkechi's grip on Chibuzo's arm tightened until her knuckles whitened. "What is he talking about?" Chibuzo asked, but before she could answer, the forest seemed to open. From between the trees, a figure emerged, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its eyes glowing faint gold like a dying ember. It moved without sound, its head tilting slightly, as if sniffing the air. Chibuzo stumbled back. "Mama." The stranger stepped forward, placing himself between them and the creature. "Don't look into its eyes," he said sharply. "If you do, it will know your name." The tall man chuckled. "Oh, it already knows. This one's blood has been promised since before he was born." He gestured toward Chibuzo. "And it is thirsty." The thing took another step, and with it came a sudden drop in temperature, their breaths puffing white in the air. The men in black began to chant again, but now their words were fast, urgent, as if they, too, feared what was in front of them. Mama Nkechi's heart pounded so loudly she could hear nothing else. But then the pendant in her hand pulsed, sending a faint warmth up her arm. Without thinking, she held it out toward the creature. The effect was instant. The thing hissed, a sound like steam hitting hot metal, and staggered back a step. Its eyes dimmed slightly, but they never left hers. The tall man's smile vanished. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Her voice was steady now. "From the man my husband trusted more than you." The stranger glanced at her, just a flicker, then back at the tall man. "We have to move. Now." They broke into a run, the creature's hiss echoing behind them, followed by the pounding of feet as the men in black gave chase. Branches whipped at their faces, the ground uneven beneath their feet. The forest seemed endless, every turn looking the same. The sound of the creature's steps was different, not fast, but steady, each one shaking the earth just slightly, like it was never in a hurry because it knew it would catch them. Up ahead, the stranger pointed. "There, the shrine." Through the trees, a small clearing opened, and at its center stood a stone structure, low and round, covered in moss. Carvings spiraled across its surface, glowing faintly in the moonlight. They were almost there when the tall man's voice rang out one last time from the darkness. "Run to your safe ground if you wish. But remember, curses are patient. And this one has all the time in the world." They stumbled into the clearing, lungs burning, the night air sharp in their throats. The stone shrine stood silent, its moss-covered walls glowing faintly, as though it had been waiting for them. The moment Mama Nkechi and Chibuzo stepped onto the carved stone floor, the warmth of the pendant spread through her entire body, driving back the cold that had followed them. The stranger pushed them forward. "Stay inside the circle," he said. "It can't cross the boundary without an invitation." Behind them, the creature emerged from the trees. Even in the dim moonlight, its thin frame seemed wrong, like it had been stretched too far. It paced the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on Chibuzo. The men in black stayed just behind it, their chanting now almost a whisper, like they were afraid to be too loud here. The tall man stepped forward, stopping just shy of the stone boundary. "You can't hide him forever," he said softly. "Every man in your bloodline has been claimed. Your husband ran. He died. The boy will follow." Mama Nkechi felt the truth in his words like a knife to her chest. She turned to the stranger. "Tell me everything," she demanded. The stranger's jaw was tight. "Your husband and I were born into the same oath. Long before you met him, our fathers bound us to the keeper, that thing out there. It feeds on loyalty bought with blood, passing from father to son. But your husband tried to break it. He stole the pendant from their shrine. He gave it to me before he died, and I have been waiting for the day it would be needed." Her eyes burned, but she held them steady on his. "And how do we end it?" He hesitated, then glanced at Chibuzo. The curse can only be broken if the one it seeks is willingly given protection by the one already bound. It needs a life in place of his. Someone has to stand in the boy's place. She understood instantly. Her grip tightened on the pendant. Then it will be me. Chibuzo's voice cracked. No, Mama. You can't. She turned to him, cupping his face with both hands. My child, I carried you 9 months, I raised you with all I had. If my blood can end this, then it will. You will live free. You will live for both of us. The stranger stepped closer, his voice urgent. If you do this, there's no coming back. You'll be theirs to chase for all time. Nkechi looked past him to the creature. It was standing perfectly still now, as though it knew what was about to happen. Slowly, she stepped forward until her bare feet touched the edge of the shrine's stone boundary. The tall man smiled faintly, and the chanting stopped. She held up the pendant. You take me, she said to the creature, her voice steady. But you will never touch my son again. The thing tilted its head, then stepped forward, crossing the invisible barrier like mist slipping into air. Chibuzo cried out, but the stranger held him back. The creature reached out a long, cold hand and touched the pendant, and in that instant, a light burst from it, so bright it blinded them all. When the light faded, the creature was gone. The men in black were gone. The tall man was nowhere to be seen. The forest was silent, and the shrine's glow had dimmed to nothing. Nkechi was still standing, breathing hard, the pendant now cool in her hand. She turned to Chibuzo and pulled him into her arms. It's over, she whispered. The curse is broken. The stranger watched them for a long moment, then nodded once and disappeared into the trees without another word. For the first time in years, Nkechi felt the air lighten around her. She took her son's hand, and together they began the walk back toward the village, the first light of dawn breaking through the leaves. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the danger had passed, and that for the first time, her son's future belonged only to him. And when the first light of dawn broke over Nsukka, the curse that had haunted generations was gone. A mother's tears had become her weapon, and her sacrifice had given her son the gift no blood oath could steal, freedom.